Welcome to the Her Story Circle podcast, the podcast that brings you the extraordinary tales of everyday women who are changing the world. I'm your host, Gertrude Mache, and I'd like to acknowledge traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today. I also like to pay my respects to elders, past, present, and emerging. Every week, we dive into the lives, challenges, and triumphs of women from all four corners of the globe. We're here to inspire, enlighten, and connect, sharing stories that uplift and empower. So grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and join us as we explore the incredible journeys of women shaping our future. This is Her Story, where every woman's voice matters. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Her Story Circle. This is Gertrude Mache here in beautiful Melbourne, Australia. And today I am graced with the presence of yet another fascinating young woman. Welcome, welcome, welcome to our tribe. Please tell everybody your full name, where you're based, and share your story with us today.
Thank you for that warm welcome, Gertrude. My name's Alpana Tyson. I'm joining you from Marrickville, Sydney. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. Thank you for this platform, Gertrude. It's an amazing podcast. So I've been able to view other people's stories, and I think it's a fabulous platform for myself as a woman of colour. It's the first time that I'm sharing my personal journey on an external platform. I've shared obviously with friends and colleagues on a face-to-face level from an external platform. So acknowledge that I'm nervous for my first podcast interview. Um, so I'm an inclusion diversity practitioner by profession, and I find it a fascinating, passionate project and hobby of mine to talk about and champion DIB as a woman of colour. So, a bit about my story. I was born in London to Sydney with my family in 2000. So, I've been here for now 24 years. My grandparents, for both my mum and dad, Gujarat in India. So, that's northwest India. And I'm passionate about inclusion and interested about stories of people's lives. When I reflect on my personal journey and my motivation to champion DIB, there's three things that I reflect on. First is my appearance as a woman of colour. Secondly is my Indian name. And thirdly, my accomplishment. So, as a person who identifies as a woman of colour, I'm very proud of being so. It is that you can tell through my appearance. So that's something that I don't actually disclose before meeting people, and people actually are able to identify myself as a woman of color. I speak Gujarati. I love learning about Indian recipes. I celebrate Diwali every year with my family. And I do identify as a woman of color when there's no visual representation and I'm in meetings. I will actually share that my pronouns are she, her, and I am a woman of color. And I'm also passionate about mentorship programs for women of color, which I'll speak to later. Color does come with experiences of marginalization. Starting from school age when I moved to Sydney, of where are you from? And there was that insinuation of diversity and I'd like to call othering, which really created exclusion before I even knew the languages of inclusion, exclusion, diversity, equity, and belonging. There's an article published this year in Stanford Social Innovation Review, and it was titled Can a Person Be Diverse? And it discussed the problem word diverse. So it talked about how in the last few years, there's been a rise of using the word diverse to refer to a single person, most frequently in hiring. So the examples that were given in the article was diverse is used as a euphemism for a person who is white and female or a person of color of any gender. The problem that that creates is it presents whiteness, maleness, heterosexuality, ableness as the default, as in those categories are presented as normal ways of being and the central core by which everyone else is defined as. And so, being a woman of color that presents as a woman of color, even before I identify as one, is something that has created those experiences of othering. Other experiences, and when I reflect on my own identity, is my name. Alpana is quite a Indian name, and it receives a variety of pronunciations in Australia. It's not a common Australian name. And when I've met people for the first time and there's an emphasis on the difficulty of pronouncing an Indian name, create a sense of exclusion and reinforces the theme of othering. And there was something that my husband and I were actually having a joke with the Australian Open just passing, and it reminded me of a comedian who shared that commentators put no emphasis on pronouncing long European tennis players' names. And if this put into pronouncing Indian names, there wouldn't really be that perceived difficulty in pronouncing multicultural names. And I do put emphasis on perceived difficulty. I think there is a part in terms of having a growth mindset rather than a fixed mindset. Does different skills, hobbies in things that they actually put effort into. And pronouncing names, I'd say, falls into that bucket. I also have an English accent. Um, didn't spend a long part of my life in London. However, I was being born there. I do have an English accent which I've never lost, and it does create sometimes a point of people may find for themselves who have English accents, and it also might also at times create that othering part of, oh, tell me where you're from, again insinuating that it's other than Australia. So those three reasons from a young age made me passionate about cultural equity, cultural sensitivity, and now as a DIEB practitioner, really using my lived experience to ensure that in workplaces we have cultural safety and cultural inclusiveness and cultural competency, and what we mean by that. And leading with empathy, that there's no blame when we're looking at those skills. They're skills to become more inclusive. So I'm passionate about coaching and teaching on core inclusive skills, and allowing people to share their story identity without feelings of exclusion and that feeling of othering. So they were the three reasons that really drew me to championing diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging, and the profession that I chose to work in. And I passion for human rights and studied human rights law at UNSW here in Sydney. And I think that that's also provided a platform in social justice that the university provided as a platform. So that's a bit about my story, and I'm really excited and happy to be sharing that with you, Gertrude.
Wow, what a journey you've been on. You know, when you talk about identifying as a woman of color living in Australia, you and I cannot hide from our chocolate brown skin, for me, for example. And it can be both a blessing and a curse because you can't quite blend into all situations. So, what have been some of the most significant challenges and triumphs that you've experienced in your career, particularly in the context of diversity and inclusion?
Yes, and I thank you for that question, and agree with your summation of not being able to hide from it. And it's something that I'm proud of. It also does raise challenges, and that's something that I'm really passionate about in terms of from a mentoring perspective. So, a couple of triumphs I'd like to share with you all is I was recently part of UNSW Law Society Diversity in Law panel, and I shared that stage with three other panelists, a barrister, Eugene Chan, a solicitor from DPP, Avani Kanda, and a senior associate at Clayton Utz, Shamila Curran. And the four of us had an opportunity to answer questions from new culturally and linguistically diverse law students. And we were able to provide tips and tools and strategies on navigating the workplace. And it was both for women and men, all genders, in terms of people of color navigating the workplace. And I do think that there's then an extra element of consideration as a woman of color. And we were able to discuss themes of navigating also legal workplaces as a person of color. So that was something that really found rewarding on both ends. And some of the people that I've met there, I still continue discussing these themes with, continue having a relationship of being their mentor and their mentees,
Mm,
who can reach out whenever they want. And another part of mentorship that I'm passionate about, I was able to be part of the Women of Australia mentorship program.
okay.
So, Women of Colour, it's a not-for-profit organisation, and it's a registered charity in Australia,
Okay.
and it's founded and led by people of women of colour. And it exists to champion Australia's women of colour through programs of education, community support, initiative, and advocacy work. And the program allowed me to be paired with a mentee who was really she's progressed in her career. She seems and has shared that she's a lot happier. And it was really a big triumph for me. And, I felt it in my heart when she actually shared her her review of that program with me, and how she was so happy that I was her mentor, and that deep appreciation of time and patience and support I provided her. And
Mm,
that's something, those two things are things that I'm proud of, and triumphs and things that I'd like to continue in my career, and happy for anyone to connect with me in terms of that mentor mentee relationship, because there are
that
common themes as women of color, will experience, and actually having that allyship I found is something that's important.
it is.
And acknowledging those themes and ensuring that people don't feel alone,
Yeah.
and strategies in terms of navigating a workplace
Yeah.
as a woman of color.
So
And
who
then
have
other
been,
things that I've really
okay, sorry.
oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, so who have been your role models and sources of inspiration in your journey, and how have they influenced your approach to your work?
Yeah, sure. So my leadership style hasn't always been, my leadership style isn't the first person to speak in the room, or to lead with what may be a traditional style of a gravitas leadership style that may be loud, the first to speak, um, just holding a room in a way that may be quite traditionally we see perhaps male dominated. My leadership style is something that took some time to develop and really lean into, is leading with empathy, in terms of connecting with people, understanding people's stories, perhaps leading with more of an introverted style and hearing things first before actually sharing my lived experience or voice. And so someone that I'd say that I saw do this on a world stage platform is Jacinda Ardern. So the former New Zealand Prime Minister
Yeah.
really, I think, led with a style that, people perhaps called a new leader, or
Yeah.
a new leadership style of empathy, as opposed to, I think, for the rest of us who were already leading with that leadership style, would be like, oh, well, we can see that in how she's
Yes.
leading, and how it's acknowledged as a leadership style. And um, I think the learning that I got from that is that it's influenced me to continue my leadership style in workplaces, and have confidence that leading with empathy is a leadership style.
Yes.
And my takeaway from that is find your own leadership style. Be true to your own personality. If you're an
Mhm.
introvert, hone in on that. If if you want to connect with people and hear their stories, lean into that. And there will you won't be the only person with that leadership style, and it may take the world some time to catch up. um, and that's okay. And that's
I love
okay.
that.
And that's something that, yeah, I think just be true to yourself and actually lean into leadership styles that feel comfortable for you.
I was going to say,
uh
you lived in New Zealand for 22 years, and watching her in action for me was truly an inspiration. It's amazing to see the ripple effect of what she stands for being felt by women all over the world. So
yes, exactly.
my next question for you is, how has your own cultural background and experience as a woman of color shaped your perspective and approach in leading diversity and inclusion initiatives?
Yeah, definitely. So um I'm proud of the lived experience work that I can bring. So as an inclusion diversity practitioner, there's a number of different areas of marginalization that we want to increase inclusion for. And having the experience of being a woman of color, there is lived experiences that I can bring to culturally and linguistically diverse work.
Mm.
And that means that there's passion points and allyship that I can really bring to my work and workplaces and colleagues that I work with. Um, there is a part of that I would definitely say that there's an importance in terms of for any DEIB practitioner to really hone in on the importance of self care because
Yes.
it's a passion area to really look after yourself, spend time with family and friends. And there's no point burning out through passion and not actually being able to pursue projects that you're passionate about because of burnout. And there's a network that I'm a part of called the Inclusion Circle, which
Okay.
does work with other DEIB practitioners. And so they're a network in terms of advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion within workplaces. And I've found actually I've been luckily nominated as executive member of that for a committee for 2 years now. And being part of a
Right.
network where there are common themes that come up in terms of DEIB practitioners perhaps burning out after a couple of years, working in an industry where people are passionate and actually how to have that part of self-care is part of the forums that we actually run. So one of the triumphs that I've had in my career was I was able to recently lead on a forum as part of that network in terms of cultivating DEI professional well-being.
Yes.
And some of the themes that came up through that was importance of connecting to purpose,
Right.
reminding yourself of the wins as you go along.
Yes.
It's a long journey, not just going to change colonization overnight. Um, Insights in terms of, again, in terms of one of the panelists that role of self-care in the lives of DI professionals,
Yes.
and use the language of deliberate self-care and integrating that approach to workplace mental health through mitigating risks, managing illnesses, and promoting and flourishing. So that's something in terms of if this is an industry that you do work in, or it's an industry that you want to work in,
Mm.
because you have that lived experience, really do focus in on that self care and being
Mm.
part of a network where you can actually discuss challenges with DIB practitioners is an important part of really succeeding in your role. So that would be some advice as well.
So you grew up here in Australia, basically. And how do you identify yourself as an Australian citizen? For people who are transplants who have come from some country to another country,
Mm,
there's that intersectionality that shows up. Like for me, I identify as being a black Kiwi. New Zealand is the one country I lived in the longest in my life. How do you identify yourself here in Australia?
Yeah, definitely. I'd say there's multiple. It might be a long sentence of how I do. So I would say I do identify as an Australian citizen. I also identify as a multicultural person in terms of being a woman of color. I'm proudly part of a culturally and linguistically diverse network as well at work that I'm leading. And in terms of my history and heritage, in family history, I have both Indian and Ugandan heritage, and they're parts of my identity. So I'd say it's not a short answer.
Yes, you're a cocktail of many nations.
It's quite a yes, and I think that goes to the point of honing in on one's identity,
Yeah.
and that should be something that someone chooses themselves as opposed to being self-imposed
Yeah.
through, for you and I, our appearance is quite clearly that we're women of color. And rather than that being something that's imposed by someone else, that being something that we get to choose. And I think
Yeah.
things like this of sharing our stories, and I love the platform of her story for that reason.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
um that's quite a long answer to a short question.
But a very, very important one because, a lot of people don't even realize what it means or what it takes to be a woman of color in a foreign country who identifies as many things. We're not just one aspect, right? We're a cocktail of all of the experiences we've had.
Definitely. And everyone's stories, is their own, and they get to choose and take ownership of them. And something that I've talked to other women of color of is allowing women of color to choose when they do, not being put on the spot in a work meeting to say, tell me more about your family history or ancestry. It's actually having that ownership for oneself, and that when it's right for each person.
So let's talk
Okay,
a little
great.
bit about overcoming systemic barriers. In your opinion, what are some of the systemic barriers that still exist for women of color in the workplace, and how can they be effectively addressed?
So, for me, the way that I think about this is reframing it from that strength-based perspective of what would I say is an effective strategy for inclusion as a DIB practitioner. And I think for me, the same tools have worked in terms of thinking from that perspective. So, I think this applies to all people who've experienced marginalization.
Mhm.
And those tools for me would be meeting people where they're at.
Yeah.
So wherever people are in their inclusion journey, we're such a diverse country in Australia, and I think that's really apparent through um, when we look at whenever there's Commonwealth voting, who our senators are. They're so different at different parts of the country. And rather than sort of approaching people with anger, um, I think leading with empathy and inclusive leadership style, and then meeting people where they're at. I've definitely found working as a DIB practitioner allows me to have conversations about inclusion, have conversations about what exclusion feels like. Whether
Yes.
someone's a woman of color, whether I'm talking to a white male, like in terms of having those concepts of inclusion, diversity, equity, and belonging at the forefront, and actually being able to describe those, meeting people where they're at, is definitely something that I've found is something that I found as an effective strategy for inclusion, and actually rolling out inclusive strategies at a workplace.
Mhm.
Some other capability I found is a growth mindset. So I mentioned that when I was talking about my name. So when we're talking about a growth mindset, we're really talking about skills that can be learnt or taught. And so it's an opposite of a fixed mindset. So a fixed mindset would be like, I don't know how to know how to do that. I wasn't born with that capability. That's it. There's no going from there. A growth mindset's about let me learn more, tell me more. Can I read about this? Can I hear more about this? And I think having that in an organization and a workplace as an inclusive strategy just allows everybody to actually get better at what they do. And then as an organization, just increase and also productivity. So I think that ties into if an organization looks at being a learning organization, really goes hand with being a growth mindset. I think other things I'd say is having a constructive culture. So, a culture where people can actually have feedback in a productive way, receive that well, does
Mm.
allow for things in terms of an effective strategy for inclusion. A couple of other strategies I found that passion for deep curiosity of differences. And cultural respect and being an inclusive leader are things that definitely as a DIB practitioner, I'm finding effective strategies for inclusion and that can actually be responsive to people with any marginalized experience.
Okay. So, looking back on your personal journey, what advice would you give to your younger self about navigating the professional world as a woman of color? Give us three nuggets of wisdom.
Yeah, sure. I would definitely have loved someone to say when I started my professional career, don't doubt yourself. Don't don't let things in the workplace, industry culture, um, uh, leadership styles that are not inclusive with managers or colleagues. Don't let that change how you perceive yourself.
Mhm.
And yeah, I think that would be a bumper sticker that I'd probably have as a younger self of doubt yourself. The
Yes.
second would be create your own leadership style. So we spoke about this before in terms of Jacinta Ardern's having that leading with empathy. That's my leadership style, an empathetic leadership style, connecting with people, hearing their stories, um,
Yeah.
perhaps being the last person to speak in a meeting, leading an introvert. That's not necessarily what we see in workplaces. Actually, there's a lot of extroverted leadership styles.
Yes.
So they definitely the top two. And then my third that I've found I've really had champions and mentors in my career who've been able to share their career path stories with me,
Mhm.
been able to talk to me about growth and leadership, and definitely things that I'm happy to continue playing a mentor role with other people. And
Yes.
I've also found there are mentorship programs out there. So Women of Color mentorship program was something that I was part of. I've also some of the Asian Leadership Project events. There are things and communities that you can be a part of. Also, being part of the inclusion circle, like I've met other DEIB practitioners where there is that relationship of allyship. So they'd be my top three. Don't doubt yourself. Create your own leadership style and connect with mentors who can then also be champions in your career. So they'd be my nuggets.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for coming online and sharing your wisdom and your story with us today. Absolutely inspiring to see a young woman who's out there in the world, not just empowering yourself, but empowering others along the way. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gertrude.
And thank you to everybody who's tuned in today. The Her Story Circle is bringing you diverse stories from women from all over the world to uplift, inspire, and energize you. So tune in again tomorrow when I interview yet another amazing woman. In the meantime, have a fantastic day, morning, or evening, wherever you are in the world, and bye for now. Thank you for tuning into the Her Story Circle podcast. I hope today's story has inspired you to believe in the power of our stories and the difference you can make in the world when you use your voice. I'm Gertrude Mache, and it's been an honor to share this space with you, where voices from all walks of life come together to weave a rich tapestry of diverse perspectives. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review our podcast to help us share these stories with more listeners. Follow us on social media by looking for the Her Story Circle podcast for more updates, and join us tomorrow for another episode filled with courage, resilience, and empowerment. Remember, your story matters, and together we're building a stronger, more inclusive world. Until next time, keep making her story.